And I believe, Alma, you're up first. We've gone almost an hour and haven't heard the name Detroit. What do we do to eliminate the us versus them mentality, uplift the city, and make it an asset for the state?
I keep telling people that if Detroit goes down the drain, the state of Michigan follows very quickly. And we do indeed have to change Detroit, but it's up to the citizens of Detroit to tell government how it can be helpful, what it needs. It's not for the governor to impose from the top down. But the city, as I think it was Dan pointed out, maybe it was Verge, it's not vibrant. I was in the city for the State of the County message on Tuesday, and I had been arguing earlier in the day with someone who had two brothers leave the University of Michigan Law School and go to Chicago. And I said, what is it with Chicago? And he said, well, you know, it's alive. And I said, Detroit's alive, but it wasn't alive Tuesday night. It needs business. It needs vibrance. It certainly needs mass transit, but the city has to identify for the state of Michigan how it can be helpful. Now, how do you change the mindset in the Michigan legislature? You deal with city mayors that understand that their fate is integrally tied up with Detroit. And there are those mayors throughout the state of Michigan. And they do work hard to inform their legislators of the importance of making sure that Detroit is successful. So it's important, if you haven't heard Detroit, I think it's not pick on Detroit. We certainly want to help rescue Detroit. And without that opportunity to turn that city around, Michigan fails. So
1 minute.
Education is critical, transportation is critical, giving the people of the city empowerment to make decisions and to decide their future is essential. So those are the things that as governor I will be looking for from the city of Detroit, is from their leaders and from their people a discussion about what needs to happen in that city to make them successful.
Thank you. Verge?
Detroit is either going to be our greatest asset or our greatest liability. I think we need to make it our greatest asset. We need to stop the hole in the donut. Basically, I mean, a number of our cities are struggling. It's not just Detroit. I'm happy to say the word Detroit, but along with our other cities. As a mayor, I understand what cities are up against. Very much, and we don't really support our cities. We don't have an urban agenda. If cities survive, if cities thrive, it's in spite of what happens in federal and state policy. I'm telling you that as a mayor. If cities are able to thrive, it's in spite of what we're up against. We are not supported. We have a hole in the donut style of development in Michigan. You know, develop the outskirts. Our cities need to be the hub of the wheel and not the hole in the donut. And the whole community will gain from that. You know, the suburbs will benefit as well. If the center is strong, then the spokes can be strong. But if the center collapses, the whole wheel collapses. That's what we've got to convince people of. I mean, I know it very directly, being in a city, trying to run a city. It's tough. It's tough. You don't get support. We need an urban agenda. You know, the fastest growing states have the fastest growing cities in them. That's a fact. Alma mentioned Chicago. You know, the young people go, and you'll hear people, some of your friends will go away for the weekend. Hey, where'd you go? We were in Chicago. How many times have your friends said, oh, we were in Illinois? They don't talk that way. You know, people identify with cities. They identify with cities, for better or worse. Oh, that city, oh, I don't want to go there. Oh, really, you were there? Oh, you live where? They identify with cities. Let's make our city something to be proud of. Detroit, the riverfront is beautiful. There's a beautiful heritage. There's a beautiful spirit in the people. Detroit can be great again. Incredible opportunities. I just want to mention one. I mean, economically, we talked about jobs. I go back to jobs. You want strong cities? You want a strong Detroit? We got to make Michigan the #1 place in the country to do business. And Detroit is ground zero for it.
1 minute.
Detroit could be the epicenter of our renewal. We've got an opportunity with the EB-5 program, for example, to bring foreign investment here. It's a program we've hardly utilized in Michigan. Other states are using it like mad. Canada has their own version of it. They're getting foreign investment. Instead of just shipping jobs overseas, they're bringing the investment back here. You know, you hear about these new millionaires in China and India. I've talked to a lot of my friends here, Chinese American and Indian Americans. They've got folks ready to invest. There's a program for them. They can buy a green card with $1 million investment if they start a business that employs 10 Americans. We ought to have these centers in some of our urban areas. We can have foreign investment zones. That's the kind of thing we're going to be working on. And I know very directly what it means when you do it and what it means when you don't do it. We've had some successes in Lansing. Our cities must work. I know how to get the investment. I know how to make it work. When our cities are thriving, our state will thrive.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks. Actually, Governor Granholm said this some time ago, so I'm stealing her line, but the only thing that should separate Detroit from Michigan is a comma, right? I mean, we are Detroit, let's face it. I think, go far enough away from Michigan and try to tell somebody where you're from, and sooner or later you're just going to say, I'm from Detroit. Because people know Detroit, the world knows Detroit. We don't have, Burge is right, we have not had an urban policy in this state. We give lip service to urban policy. We have beliefs. 90% of Michigan citizens, for example, believe that we should have heavy investment in bright, interesting urban spaces. We should preserve our farmland, and we should protect open space. That's what 90% of Michigan residents believe. However, our system of investment, our system of development, our very system of land use in this state places a higher premium and a higher value and greater incentives to build new on a green field where there is no infrastructure than to rebuild in places like Detroit and Saginaw and Grand Rapids and Lansing, where we all together have already spent billions of dollars to build water lines and sewer lines and streets and parks and schools and fire stations and police stations. This isn't just about saving Detroit or Flint. This is just fundamentally smart public investment in economics. We are growing our population, growing our land use 7 or 8 times faster than we're growing our population. The worry I have is when capital begins to flow again, after this economic crisis is gone, we will return to a sprawl mentality and away from rebuilding places like Detroit. So, quickly, I proposed 7 years ago, almost 7 years ago, that we write into Michigan law a definition of our built environment. It was a concept, Conan Smith is here. Do you know Conan? Have you met this man? This kid is brilliant. He worked with me on this. We came up with something we call commerce centers, which defined the entire built environment of Michigan. 70% of our population live on 8% of our land. And that includes Detroit, but also includes Flint. It includes our urbanized townships. It includes our small cities. The lack of urban policy isn't a lack of policy about Detroit. It's a lack of policy about preserving the built environment in Michigan, which has to be presented to the market in a way the market can absorb. Otherwise, we can be all about preserving open space and farmland. We can be all about preserving our natural areas unless we figure out ways to allow the market to find its way into places in Detroit and Flint and Saginaw and fill in the blank. Then we're really not doing this work. So I propose this, and I'm telling you, when I'm governor, I'm going to make it happen, that we write into Michigan law where we've made this huge public investment. And we disproportionately spend our investment incentives, our public money that goes into incentivizing development into those places, like Detroit, where we've already made tremendous public investment, and where our values say we want to develop, we want to invest. That's what we need to do. It's not just about Detroit. It will be good for Detroit, but we need to rid ourselves of the old paradigm that if somehow you favor that sort of policy, that it becomes a Detroit versus the rest of the state question.
Time's up.
That's not true. It's the built environment that we need to reinvest in. including Detroit.